Hi, I'm Ashley Hawkins, and I am the Manga Librarian. And today we are talking about manga for you to read. Because you're a librarian, and your tastes are going to be different from your patrons, particularly if you're a school librarian. Um, so, the reason why I decided to do this is because I know that your tastes are probably different, like I said, from your patrons, particularly if you're a school librarian. My tastes are different from my students, and I know that for a fact. Um, I've expressed multiple times on this channel that I am not like a huge shonen fan. Like I'm not huge into Naruto. I'm not huge into, you know, the big series. Like, I find value in them, and I know what they mean to my students, and I purchase them and I make sure they're available, but they're not what I sit down and read to enjoy. Like when I sit in front of my computer or my iPad, or I actually crack open a volume of manga, which happens less and less these days, um, unless it's like Fantagraphics or something. Um, so it's important to me to like express to you, if you are one of those librarians, and some librarians do like express this to me, where they go, listen, I get it, I make sure I have it, but I'm just not into it. And they express that there is like this disconnect when they speak with patrons and students, because they aren't enthusiastic about the same things the students are enthusiastic about. And or the patrons. Um, and that disconnect comes from, you just don't get the whole format. And I think it's okay to not be into a particular story, but I know that there's so much that manga has to offer that I would encourage you to find manga that you like. Because here's the thing, a lot of people find graphic novels that they like they're not into DC or Marvel, but they have found certain graphic novels that they really value and enjoy and love reading. And the same can be said for manga. The thing is, you are essentially a patron who needs reader's advisory, and I am here to provide it for you. So I'm operating off a few assumptions, based on what I know about librarianship, and based on what I know about the type of person who wouldn't necessarily automatically adhere to the the tent poles of manga. So I'm kind of supposing that somebody who automatically adheres to manga is probably masculine, um, enjoys shonen, and so I am leaning a little bit more feminine in my recommendations. Um, and I just want to say that. So, dudes, um, listen, I kind of I kind of assume that if you are masculine, uh, it's a little easier for you to find the manga you like. It's in your face, and you probably enjoy shonen, or you've found seinen series that appeal to you. Like, I can just tell you, like, you'll probably like, if you need something more artistic, you probably want Junji Ito, or you probably want to read some, you know, some Gekiga. It's a little easier because your stuff is more accessible. So I'm leaning a little bit more femme, because also our profession is heavily feminine. And so I'm going to lean that way, and just those are my reasons. I can follow this up with a video with more recommendations for masculine librarians and recommendations for you. I would say, honestly, my horror video probably encompasses a lot of my recommendations for you. If you don't want shonen or popular seinen series. But the reality is that a lot of the world is your oyster. So I want to uplift some titles that don't get a lot of circulation, and really should be more well known, because I think they would. I think a lot of people would really enjoy them. And also, if you are more masculine, what's going to hurt you about reading the titles I'm going to recommend? Nothing. In fact, I feel like more masculine people should read more feminine stories. So there you go. So I have a really long list of titles, and it's on Anime Planet, and I'm going to put it into the description box below, because I cannot possibly go through all of them. There's actually quite a bit that's out there that I think can really engage an adult reader. And I'm even going to add to this, because as I read, as I go through, there's going to be things that I'm going to remember. Just this will kind of be like a list in flux. I'm using Anime Planet instead of Goodreads for a couple of reasons. First off, Goodreads is owned by Amazon, and I am trying to disengage from Amazon products. And second off, I actually find Anime Planet way cleaner, because it organizes things by series. So instead of I find for manga, Goodreads is very messy. Because it'll do things by individual volumes, because it tracks by ISBNs, and also it gets very confused based on Japanese editions, French editions, Spanish editions, English editions. It gets very gloopy and confused, and also, there's Tokyo Pop editions, Dark Horse editions, Viz editions, Kodansha editions of, there can be multiple editions of a title, and that can also be very nebulous and hard to understand. And also, they're missing some things. Just because sometimes if something's digital only, for some reason it won't find its way into the Goodreads database. So, I find this to be the better way to present a list, just as what it is. So, I'm going to just kind of talk and highlight some things, and if you want the full list, like I said, it'll be in the description box below. So let's talk a little bit. So I'm gonna kind of do by categories, because there are a few different categories that I kind of, I guess, mentally put things into. So the first I'm going to talk about are books that I think appeal to librarians. So there are books that are actually deal in some way about libraries, and I just want to start with those. First off, I can't mention this category or this topic without starting with Ascendance of a Bookworm, which is about, it's an isekai story about a woman who dies in our world. She had been working towards becoming a librarian and was just about to realize her dream when she dies, and then she is reincarnated into a world where books are not as easily accessible. And she realizes this and becomes determined to become a librarian. She's like, I'll do anything. And so she goes on a journey to make her dreams come true. She's going to do anything to become a librarian in this fantasy world. So it actually like brings into play access of materials, printing, the formulation of printing presses, and accessibility of printing materials, how in a developing world access to printed materials can be a class-based thing, and there's like all these really intricate things going on. It's a really great story. It's also an anime. And it's basically the perfect librarian anime and manga. So that's the first one that I'd recommend. The second is Magus of the Library, which is a fantasy story, actually based on a fantasy novel. But the manga involves a young boy who loves to read, but because he is a little bit different from everyone else, he is actually banned from going into the library in his town until some librarians from the Great Library of Aftzak appear, and things shift for him because these librarians come and they believe in things like access to materials, and there's actually a lot of whoever wrote this really understands libraries and really understands a modern concept of libraries in terms of access and providing that access, and the importance of information and the power of information. Also, books have power in this world, so they provide magic. They can contain magical beings. So there's the information and the stories that are contained within books, but also there can be more. So it's a really beautiful story, and it's also, like I said, a really wonderful librarian story. So those two are like my main heavy hitters for librarians. I think they're something that every librarian should check out. And they're also ones that you could put into a school library collection very easily. They circulate pretty well among my students. Like, they're not the most popular, but they do pretty well. Magus of the Library actually does better than Ascendance of a Bookworm. Ascendance of a Bookworm has its own following, though. It has a certain popularity. But Magus of the Library has like some action adventure elements, and it takes the right student, but once I get them, they get really into it. Another just add-on really quick, there's a newer shoujo series called And Yet You Are So Sweet. And that one might appeal to you the way it appealed to me, because it involves two library aides falling in love. So the setting of the story is primarily a school library in Japan. And also that's kind of interesting to me, just to see like how a school library in Japan operates, because it's very different from how we operate school libraries here in North America. The students primarily run the library, and they do a lot of the things that we as the school librarian do. So they do a lot of the maintenance and the checking out, and they have a lot of independence, and so you get to see a lot of like what their roles are in doing that, and also it's just like a really sweet, innocent love story. It's like a very sweet, mild shoujo. I really love it. So those are kind of my library adjacent suggestions. Um, then let's get into things that I'm going to suggest because they are for grown-ups. And I'm actually going to kind of focus on talking about mangaka. I want to talk to you about, first off, Nagatakabi. So there is a particular mangaka named Nagatakabi. She is a memoir mangaka. So she writes memoir. I'm trying to think of like who would be the best corollary to her. Maybe Alison Bechdel. I don't know. There's no like perfect corollary to her. But she writes very brutally honest memoir about her mental health, things she has gone through. Her most recent memoir is about her struggles with alcohol, and it really, and just how she only had a drinking problem for a few years, and it did a number on her body. She has pancreatitis now, and now she has to deal with that. She's in her 30s, she's young, and now she has this chronic illness alongside all of the other issues that she has been dealing with. And, you know, it deals with like these heavy issues of like, you know, she was self-medicating for mental health issues because she has documented pretty extensively in other manga that she's written. So she's also written My Lesbian Experience with Loneliness and My Solo Exchange Diary, and both of those really delve into like her struggles with things like ADHD, eating disorders. She has a lot of struggles with her sexual identity and really understanding those things. And even very recently, she did an interview for TCAF, and she, in that interview, still is like, I still don't really have answers for like my sexual identity and how she's really working through her personal issues through these manga. And so it's very, you get this very personal image of her. These are manga that I honestly wouldn't recommend for a school library. I think they're just a little bit too adult. I think they require a certain maturity to read, and just they're for adults. I mean, there's sexual content and everything, and maybe that's why, but I think it's more just it requires a certain level of maturity, and I just think you've got to get to a certain point. And the thing is, as you read it, you develop a lot of. She writes it in such a way, and she's so self-deprecating, and she really is. She expresses like being very concerned, like what are people going to think about me when I tell, especially in her most recent book. She really is like, what are people going to think of me when I say I drank so much that I developed this physical problem, like I ruined my health. And the thing is, it really gives you sort of the opposite of what she feared would happen. Her honesty really, I don't know, it really strikes you in the heart. Like, I finished that book, like, I just really want her to be happy. she often expresses like, don't expect too much out of me, but it's like you also just really come out of it like, you just really want this person to find happiness. And she is growing, and you see the growth happening, but she's going through a lot, and the honesty is something that really is appreciated. And her art style is it's very different from manga that you've probably read before. So I heavily recommend all of her work. You can read it kind of in sequence. You can start with my lesbian experience with loneliness, but you can also read them in isolation. You can read my my alcoholic escape from reality and not have read my lesbian experience with loneliness, or my solo exchange diary. But I think you get a fuller picture of what's going on in that if you've read the other two. So, and she has another one coming out soon. She alludes at the end of my alcoholic escape from reality to the forthcoming book that she's writing, or it's now published in Japan. It'll be out in English fairly soon. I'm not sure. They just announced that it's being translated. And the translator does really amazing work. I believe it's been the same translator the entire time. I believe it's always been Jocelyn Allen. So those are books that I heavily recommend. They're ones that I'd say just pick up for yourself. Read them, enjoy them. Enjoy is maybe a weird word to use, but there's something different, and I think you'll start to understand like the power of the format. Because the thing is, manga as a format can do very different things, and it doesn't always have to be what you might think manga is. So I think she's like the best demonstration of what other things manga can be and do. Alongside that, I also highly recommend any book by Akiko Higashimura, who is the author of Tokyo Tarariba Girls and Princess Jellyfish. I really love her work. She writes for adult women. She writes about concerns of adult women. Princess Jellyfish itself is a masterpiece of josei. It deals a lot with like gender issues, gender identity, expectations of women in society, and one of the things that I really enjoy about it is that it ends on a note of the protagonist really not having to make a romantic choice. It's more about her. And I find that really empowering and enjoyable. And it's very unique in manga to have something that ends without a clear, decisive romantic choice having been made. And that being okay. So that's something that I really enjoy. Her work really kind of works on that ambiguity. Tokyo Tarariba Girls is about women who are in their 30s and a lot of the anxieties that come with that, and the pressure in Japanese society to get married and start a family and behave in certain ways. So I'd recommend any of her work. She also has an autobiographical or semi-autobiographical series called Blank Canvas that explores like her growth into a manga artist. That one's a really good one, and that one's really good for school libraries. Princess Jellyfish is also on my shelf and actually has circulated pretty well, even though it's about their college age. It still does pretty well. I think it's just such a good story that even though it's about slightly older people, it's still, and there's nothing really in it that is objectionable or whatever. I don't have Tokyo Terroriba Girls because I just don't feel like it's super relatable to my students. I think that's really something that's more relatable to adults. Although it's a really fun story. The other thing is her work's funny. So if you're looking for something that's more lighthearted, you'll like Akiko Higashimura's work. So, and then I'm gonna talk a little bit about a couple of more one-off stories that have darker themes. So the first one is My Broken Mariko. So this is a one-shot story that I really loved. It's really beautiful, but it's this one is a rough story. It's about a woman whose best friend has committed suicide, and she wants to do right by her remains, and it is pretty heart-wrenching. And it's sort of her reflecting back on, their time together as friends, on the things that happened to Mariko, her friend. And there's some really beautiful panels that just like you see them and your heart just hurts, but in that good way. So this is one that I really recommend. It's not, like I said, this is one that is really adult. It really hits hard. You will cry when you read it. And it's beautiful in its own way. And in a similar vein is a story called Haru's Curse, which is the story of a sister who winds up in a relationship with her dead sister's boyfriend. It's sort of this intense dealing with, loss and heartbreak, and it's in a very similar vein. And so these are two stories about grief. Haru's Curse is different because it's a little bit more relationship based, and it's more about sort of moving on. And both of them, I think, are strong stories. It's not all doom and gloom for adults. Really quickly, some comedy series that I recommend are I'll always recommend The Way of the House Husband. I've talked about it before. It's one of my favorites. I also really like Ex Enthusiasts, Motocaré Mania. So Ex Enthusiasts is the story of a woman who is completely hung up on her ex-boyfriend and is obsessed with him, and just that's all I'm gonna say. It's very wacky and it's a lot of fun. I've also talked about Eniel and Duvelia, which is from the mangaka behind Witch Hat Atelier. It's a definitively adult series, essentially a gender flipped Good Omens, where it's only the wacky hijinks. So that one is well worth your while. I also really like the series is Kichijoji, The Only Place to Live, which is a series about a pair of twin sisters who run a real estate agency and in a neighborhood called Kichijoji, which is actually one of my favorite neighborhoods. So this was really funny to me because I came back from Japan and I was like, oh man, I really loved Kichijoji. I visited it multiple times. It's actually it's actually where Studio Ghibli is, and it has like a really nice shopping district, and it has a really beautiful park, and it's just a really nice part of Tokyo. And I found this manga like immediately after coming back that was like, Kichijoji is like so trendy and overrated, and what it actually does is it talks about different neighborhoods in Tokyo and like what makes them great places to live. So when people come and are trying to live in Kichijoji and they're like me, like, oh, I love this neighborhood, it's so wonderful. I love all the lovely bakeries and the park, and so they take them around and are like, well, here's this neighborhood that has this and this, and it's actually based on the real neighborhoods. And I don't know, I really enjoy just the look at the actual living in Tokyo, and I look forward to kind of using some of the things I've learned reading the series to navigate my next trip to Tokyo and be a little less, I don't know. I don't even know the word. Be a little less of a hipster, I guess. So those are kind of more comedic series, and I'm gonna wrap up just finally with two series that I think are just in general really great representations of disability. The first one is Perfect World by Rie Aruka, which is the story of a couple. So one of them is a wheelchair user, and one of them is able-bodied, and the wheelchair user is actually the crush of the female main character. They had a thing in like high school before he became a wheelchair user, and then they meet up again, and she actually has all these feelings of trepidation, like, oh, I couldn't possibly date somebody in a wheelchair, but then it's like, but also I have all these strong feelings for him. And they, it's partially about how they overcome their individual foibles about making a relationship work, but also the male main character is an architect, and so he is designing homes that are accessible to others. So there's this whole element of like making livable spaces, and making things accessible. And then a very sweet shoujo manga that I really love is A Sign of Affection. And this is a manga that features a deaf main character, and she uses Japanese sign language, and the sign language is very prevalent throughout the entire series. So it's featured in the artwork, and it's just really well done and depicted. And, it's partially her expressing herself to this guy that she meets and likes. And, he speaks all these other languages but doesn't know sign language. And meeting her makes him realize, like, he's always been looking outward and never realizing that there are other things he could learn within Japan. And there's, like, all these elements that are really interesting. And they get to know each other better. And so these are all series that I highly recommend. I think if you read them, you'll get something out of it. Like I said, there's more. There's way, way more that you could read and enjoy, and they are not the typical things that you associate with. None of these series or books that I've mentioned feature things like fan service. They are all, several of them are what would be considered gekiga. So they're more artistic manga. So all the Nagatakabi books are technically gekiga, I believe. I've also mentioned Mariko's Curse, My Broken Mariko is gekiga. They don't always look the way you associate with manga. So I think you can really find something. So I hope that helps. Like I said, if you're looking for more, or you just want to see more information about any of these books, I've got the list down below, and I will see you in the next video.